scantily clothed women on the billboards. I mean, I'm going to put it to you the way it was. They see these pictures and scandalize them, and that kind of stuff was not allowed in Russia. And they would see movies about where that men and women openly committed sexual immorality of all kinds. And again, that stuff was not allowed to be seen, shown in the Soviet Union. And they said they just simply could not stand Western decadence and Western young boys who just were not the least bit interested in politics or in world affairs and cared more about, like I say, which girl they could get tonight, or who's going to win the next baseball game, or things like that, and just not the least bit interested in what really was to them what really mattered. But these people came to the West and eventually went back, as was the case of a lot of persons. Again, they could not stand Western decadence. Brezhnev died, and two old men of very ill health succeeded him. Two men back to back, but they were both old and in health. And eventually the Russians became aware that their system was not working. And then we'll come back to Russia later and talk about the decline of Russia, the Soviet Union it was then. All right, Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe. Now, what countries I'm talking about? Among others, East Germany, East Berlin, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Macedonia. These countries that made up Eastern Europe that fell all behind the Iron Curtain. Now, you don't hear the term Iron Curtain anymore, but these were what you call the Iron Curtain countries. Iron Curtain. These countries began to feel more and more like they were isolated from the rest of the world and cut off from the rest of the world because of communism. The communists had taken over. Many dissenters were executed, and even communists were executed if they disagreed with the idea of total obedience. So you must obey the Soviet Union in everything that happened. Now, in 1956, Hungary revolted, and Hungary lost. There were three big revolts that occurred against the Soviet Union. The first one was Hungary. This is the first international crisis I remember. Then came Czechoslovakia. I hope I've spelled that right. Czechoslovakia in 1968. And then Poland in 1980. Now I mentioned how that the Pope John Paul II claimed that, the Catholic Church claimed that he brought down the Soviet Union. Keep in mind, the Pope John Paul II was himself Polish. He was the first non-Italian pope in 400 years. But anyway, in all three cases, their rebellions were crushed. But within 10 years after the Polish rebellion, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Germany, East Germany told the Soviet Union, get out of here, go home. So in other words, when the Soviet Union broke, it wasn't just that their 15 republics rebelled. At the same time the 15 republics rebelled, all these satellite countries rebelled also. Not China, of course, but all of Eastern Europe rebelled against them at the same time. And the Soviet Union simply had been fighting a long war in Afghanistan. The military was weak. They could not take on anymore. So the Soviet Union just split apart. Could the same thing happen to us? I definitely think so. All right. Now, when Hungary was promised free elections, the communists knew that they would lose. So both sides were guilty of promising free elections. We promised Vietnam free elections. which we didn't give. And in the case of the Soviet Union, they promised free elections to Hungary, which they didn't allow. Hungary's leader was a man named Nagy. I'm going to write his name down. He was executed for dissenting against the Soviet Union. The whole world was highly upset. And this was part of Khrushchev's peaceful coexistence, executing a dissenting leader, Nagy. And this got a lot of suspicion going on. Hungary was to remain communist for 34 more years. Again, the United States was afraid. I mean, under Eisenhower, the United States was afraid of getting involved in a nuclear war. We did nothing to help Hungary. Hungary believed, now folk, they believed that we would move in with our troops and our atomic bombs and fight. They were wrong. The United States did not get involved, but Hungary eventually got its freedom 34 years later. Now, the United States set up shortwave radio, and I'm not going to write this down, but I mean, well, I've told you, I am a ham operator. Any of you know what shortwave radio is by any chance at all? We Americans don't. For many years, most of the world's listening. Shortwave radio is radio that can travel by skip and travel for thousands of miles, sometimes 8 or 10,000 miles. And most of the world's listening has been done by shortwave radio. So the United States set up Radio Free America, which sent shortwave broadcasts into the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union in turn had a powerful radio station called Radio Moscow. I used to listen to Radio Moscow myself some. And yes, they would brag that it's safe to go to a park in Moscow even at night. It was a slam against the United States. Therefore, don't you go to a park at night, especially if you're female. Don't do it. Anyway. But they would brag that even their women could visit a park at night and go for a stroll. And yes, the Soviet Union executed rapists at that time. And as far as I know, Russia probably still does. We used to, until the Supreme Court outlawed it in the late 1970s. But for a few years, for several years, we were executing rapists also. All right. Czechoslovakia made reforms in 1968. The Soviet Union sent in troops and crushed reform. Again, the United States did nothing. Now, in Germany, East Germany, they had an economic hardship, so the East Germans began to flee to the West. Among them, East Germany's most skilled workers would flee to the West and find jobs. So the Soviet Union began to outlaw German workers moving into Germany, or East Germans moving into Germany. East Germany, they put up a wall, the big Berlin Wall we talked about last time, to keep the East Germans from defecting. East Germany, by Western standards, remained poor, but it was the richest of all these countries, these Iron Curtain countries in Europe. The people there were richer than Czechoslovakia, owing in part now to the German people are industrious. All right, folks, I'm going to pause here and call